Very special guest for you today. One of the few people who I really look up to in the broadcasting world, a true radio legend if there ever was one, and a best-selling author many times over. Michael Savage is with me. God, Faith, and Reason, his latest book. I've just completed it. It's really an odyssey of his journey to faith and what it's meant to him over the years. And it's not just purely a traditional book about Christianity per se. A lot of it's a personal reflection, and a lot of it is about how he conceptualizes God personally. It's a fascinating read per usual, and as always, the prose is a pleasure. So good morning, Dr. Savage. Thanks so much for joining me today. I'm glad to have you back.
Alex, what a build-up. That's really wonderful coming from you in particular, because I know how carefully you choose your words, let's put it that way. And it's always great to be with Breitbart's organization. And I just want to emphasize this. You know, you hear God in a title right away, you walk by. It's like, who wants to hear that preachy, sanctimonious stuff? That's the immediate reaction in a nation as devoid of any faith as you can ever imagine. That's where we're at today. I mean, Rome was probably more faithful than this country is right now, at least from the media point of view. And yet, there's a hardcore of people who've never forgotten that this whole thing didn't begin on its own, out of nowhere, that there must be more to it all. And I just want to begin by saying that, forget the book for a minute, you know, there's the famous image of Albert Einstein that the colleges had in the 60s and 70s, with the wild, crazy hair and his tongue sticking out. You ever seen that poster, Alex?
Of course. It's very popular.
So that was put out in the 60s by the radicals to show that even Einstein, a genius, was a wild, crazy guy. Well, he wasn't. And an atheist at that. It was sort of a photo of licentiousness. But Einstein said as he got older, the more he probed the perimeters of the universe, the more he was sure that there was a creator, a grand creator. It could not happen by accident. That seems to be left out of every discussion of one of the greatest minds of all time. Now, having said that, I'm just one of the many billions who's, arrived on this planet and have asked the universal questions. And my odyssey, God, Faith, and Reason, goes back to me as a little boy in the streets of the Bronx, all the way up to now. And every collected writing is what it comes down to. It's not a continuous narrative. People can pick this up in a bookstore and see that there are one-page stories and 10-page stories, such as a Jewish gangster, for example, and what happened to him. This guy was as hard as they come. He was shot 8 times and survived. And he said it was only when he was broken in prison that he realized that God saved him. It's a pretty amazing book, in the sense that no matter how cynical the listener may be, who thinks that he or she doesn't need this kind of garbage that their grandmother needed, there will come a time in their life that they will need something more than themselves. And at that point, they'll realize that they're not alone in this quest. And I think that that's really what the book is about.
Yeah, and you do a few things that I think are very important. First of all, you just referenced it, is that you draw off of your childhood. You also draw off of calls to your radio show. We have a very caller-driven show here at Breitbart, and I know that you pay very close attention to your own audience, and you learn from them the same way they learn from you, which is also interesting that you bring in anecdotes that I remember hearing on your show. As I listen, they come up in the book, which is really enjoyable to revisit. But one thing that you've been known for, at least recently, is being pretty prescient, is that you were one of the first people to identify Trump, probably the first major popular figure to endorse him outright. And it's one of these things where I think you're very prescient in this book, because one thing that happens to have come up on our radio show with our callers and in our comment section at Breitbart over the last few weeks is just how godless America is. And the chickens have really come home to roost with this Weinstein scandal that spiraled into virtually every industry. So I think this is the perfect time to have a reflection on God. Did you know that coming, or is that just coincidence, or was it something you felt in your bones that this is the right moment to write a book about religion?
Well, the question is the timing. I think is what you're saying. How did you figure out to publish it now in this time of being eyeless in Gaza, when we were sort of wandering around without vision? Weinstein, then Charlie Rose. Where is this going to end? all of the sanctimonious people like Charlie Rose and all people. How much more sanctimonious can you get than Charlie Rose? I mean, you could expect it from Weinstein, a dirtbag producer from Hollywood. But would you have ever expected Mr. Peepers, the deacon of the liberal intellectual church, would have run around naked out of his showers? I have to have a laugh. Sometimes you have to laugh, too.
The stories individually are quite hilarious, though they're also disturbing in many ways. But you said that you had to write this book. You said you're not going to write another political book. So this isn't a political book, though Trump comes up in a moment or two. But I have this moment where I'm tormented, even though Trump's the president, and technically the Republicans have so many state houses and governorships, and there should be a lot to be encouraged by. But the godlessness of this country is really, we're losing touch with something very important.
Well, I wouldn't blame Trump for the godlessness. However, on the other hand, I will say that I think he's being misadvised. I think he's been steered to the left. I think that's pretty clear. He's still doing some good things for those of us who believe some hard things need to be done. And the issue is who's steering him, who's advising him. We can pretty much guess where this is coming from.
Sure.
Just last week, I spent 2 days, 6 hours, imploring the president to reverse the importation of elephant and lion trophies from Africa. I went berserk. I'm an animal rights activist. I have been for years. And I couldn't believe what I was looking at. They're going to let them bring in, trophies from Africa in this day and age? What are we, suddenly 1880? We don't know any better? And I said on the air, and I'll tell you the truth, I knew that I would burn any bridges here. I didn't care. I said, Mr. Trump, I said, I hope you're listening. I hope you get the message. I said, if you do not reverse this order, you'll not only be a one-term president, when they come to impeach you, and they will, on some other garbage, you'll lose all of the women voters who came over to your side and half the independents. This is a very important issue. I was shocked Friday night at dinner to get a text from someone high up in the media who said he's reversing the ban. But here's the trick to it all, Alex. Do you know who the president thanked for helping him see this? He thanked Greta Van Susteren, who doesn't even have a show, and Piers Morgan. And he ignored my audience.
Wow.
Something's very, very wrong in Glockamora. And I don't know who is steering the president away from his core base, which consists in part my huge audience of activist listeners. I don't know what's going on there, Alex, but somebody is telling him, forget Savage, forget his audience. It's a mistake that they're making because they needed us to get where they are. Or as Jimmy Durante said, be awfully nice to everyone you meet on the way up because you're going to meet them all on the way down.
Yeah, it's such a wise statement. And to be clear, I wasn't actually blaming Trump for the godlessness. I just think that the godlessness has just become more apparent. And I was going to say that, Dr. Savage, that by the way, he hasn't been on Breitbart's radio show. I think he did one interview with us in print. He hasn't been on our radio show in over a year. I know he hasn't been on yours, and it's one of these things where he certainly is on the inside. It's pretty overwhelming.
Yeah. Yes. Once Steve left, everything changed. But let's go to the bigger issue of God, faith, and reason.
Sure.
Okay. What's it about? How did timing come about? My publisher approached me about a year ago, right after the election, to do a Trump book. They wanted a crash book. I said, I'll only do it under one condition, which is that you publish my God book. They didn't really want to publish the God book. It's like, okay, we don't really, not into that, right? It's not a big money maker. I said, it's my thanks to God for having given me what I have, and I've got to return the favor. Okay, so Trump's war came out. It was number one on the New York Times list, which is, by the way, a miracle unto itself. Alex, 0 television. I'm banned by Fox News. I don't know if you know that. They'll have Charles Manson on. They'll have an ISIS killer on, a rapist, a murderer, deviant pervert. They don't mention my name. This is what was done to people in the Soviet Union. I'll tell you about that another time, because this, too, will be uncovered one day. The whole Fox News thing is crazy altogether. So without them, without any media really to speak of, certainly the Drudge Report posted something about the book. It became number one on the New York Times list, which is actually a miracle, Alex. Think about it. No television, virtually no exposure, and the book became #1. How did that happen? Well, anyway, so that was a good hit, blah, blah, blah. So I was working on the God, Faith, and Reason book for a long time. Here it is. And I said, hold it for right after Halloween, just before Christmas. And there's an interesting little subchapter in there called Halloween Now Bigger Than Christmas, to go to your main point. You know, you drive around San Francisco or most cities in America. There used to be St. Christopher medals on the dashboards of cars in Queens, where I grew up, in New York. You'd see a little St. Christopher, right? It gave me a sense of, I don't know, continuity and calmness to know that there were religious people around. You know what I'm saying? You drive around now, St. Christopher is dead, and you have dream catchers, voodoo dolls hanging off the mirror. You can't even see out of the windshield. If that doesn't symbolize the debasement of our society, I don't know what else could say it better than that, Alex.
Yes. So let's talk about the title of the book, Dr. Savage. And again, Dr. Michael Savage is my guest, best-selling author, talking about his book, God, Faith, and Reason. His show's available in pretty much every major media market and widely available online, where I think he's the #1 most downloaded online host in terms of terrestrial talk host, which is pretty cool, because that's how so many people get their talk radio now. But why God, faith? That makes sense. But adding reason, and this is something where you and I think, see eye to eye on this. I tend to think of myself as a reason, logical guy, but I also go to church. So how is that? How are we the way we are, Dr. Savage?
Well, let's start with the fact that I have an earned PhD from the University of California at Berkeley. I have 2 earned master's degrees. And so therefore, I'm an extremely logical, reasonable person. It's not as though I haven't any education in the sciences. I do. I have a strictly logical mind. However, with reason, you come to understand that you must have faith. With faith, you come to understand there must be God. So it's a three-way system here. At the end of the day, when you sit in that church and you contemplate your little dance in the sun called life, the short dance in the sun that we all have, and then you say, is there an eternity? What does it all mean? Am I really judged? Does it really matter what I do? Or should I throw caution to the wind and do what the heck I want? You come to understand that there has to be a grand designer. There has to be a judgment day. There has to be another world. And so, as I say, reason leads you to faith, which leads you to God. That's the whole thing, God, faith, and reason.
Very interesting. And so you believe, you had an optimistic note in the book, that you do think there's going to be a spiritual revival in the United States. And that's something that I don't know if I necessarily agree, but I certainly hope you're correct. What gives you that impression, what are the signs that you're seeing on that regard?
Unless there is a spiritual revival, this country will be overtaken by Islam. And it's only a matter of time. They've had their spiritual revival, and that's called jihad, or war against the West, namely Christians and Jews. There's no question about it. Only the idiotic would disagree with that statement. They're not coming here to assimilate, especially those coming from throwback nations living in the 9th century, bringing their women and wearing costumes from the Middle Ages. It's crazy. How can this end good for Western civilization? And by the way, this is not the first time that this has occurred. It's many times that has occurred. Now, only a revival in faith can save the West. The question is, can the West overcome the deeply ingrained anti-God faithlessness of the government media establishment? That's the only question there is. I don't know that Trump is the man to do it. I don't know that he's Constantine. But somebody has to come along to save this nation, because we're not going to save it in a secular manner. We'll just be overrun and disappear completely. When I say disappear, I don't mean the landmass will disappear. I don't mean the people will disappear. Our entire way of life will disappear, which is what the left has wanted for over 70 years. How about the chants from the early feminist movement? Hey, hey, ho, ho. The Western civilization has got to go. Well, right. They're getting their wish, aren't they? And what happens when Western civilization goes to all of those radical feminists? Do you think that the Muslim invasion and the Muslim invaders are going to treat them well? Are they that crazy? So I'll stop right there, because this is not really about Muslims. It's about America. And moreover, it's not even about America. It's about mankind in general. Because every human on this planet, no matter what their religion may be, ultimately thinks about the eternal questions, Alex, don't you think?
Yes, they do, but it seems like a lot of this discussion has been banished from the public square, which is precisely how you describe it in the book, where there are certain views that are normative views, that are traditional religious views, that are now no longer allowed to be discussed in polite company. And if you do discuss them, then you're not taken seriously. And I think of any example of any public figure doing any religious demonstration or act is mocked and derided by the establishment media. This is a very dangerous path that we're on. I think you've tracked it in the book. Talk about that portion.
Well, that's the issue, isn't it, what you touched on, which is everyone's afraid to even express faith in God. They think that they're be seen as an idiotic primitive rube. And that's because of the smart men in the world like Harvey Weinstein. It's men like him who've chased God away. It's men like him who've killed God. It's men like him who've driven a stake in God's heart. But as I've said, God is not dead. Man is dead to God. That's one of my main lines in God, Faith, and Reason. Think about that one. God is not dead, as Nietzsche said. Savage says man is dead to God. And what that means is that if man is dead to God, God can come back in our lives if we become alive to God. It's not a paradox. It's not a riddle. God is not dead. Man is dead to God. But man can be reborn to God, no matter what his religious beliefs are. Even an atheist can be reborn to God. Look, let's talk about atheism and religion. How does that match? Look at Alcoholics Anonymous. Look at Alcoholics Anonymous. I was on a major guy's show Saturday on WABC. I didn't know that Larry Kudlow, a great guy, loved my book. I thought he was a financial guy because he had crashed and burned under drugs and alcohol many years ago, and he said it was only through God that he came back and has his life back again. I didn't know that. The point is that you send people into AA or alcoholics or drug treatment. Aren't they all taught that they have to give their lives over to a higher power? What in the world is that but acknowledging that an ego-driven life is a dead end? And so I think that we do see God, but we don't use the word God. We use words like higher power. It's fine to me. I'm not a preacher. I'm not a rabbi. I'm not a proselytizer. What I'm trying to say is all of us will come to a point in our lives, and pay attention, listeners, I mean you. You will find out one day when you're all alone, you'll scream, and you'll scream not for Joe and not for Mary, but you'll scream for God to help you. That's what happens to everybody.
Yeah, and you give a lot of good documentation of instances where that does happen in the book. The book focuses more on the Old Testament, but also considers other religions beyond Judeo-Christian religion. So it's pretty comprehensive in terms of everything gets touched on within the book, Dr. Savage. Again, the book, God, Faith, and Reason, out now. You can get it on audiobook, wherever books are sold. The last question for you today, Dr. Savage, talk to me about where you saw God personally. You write about your nightmares that you used to have, which was very, very compelling. Where has God played a role in your life directly?
Oh boy. Well, okay, one quick anecdote. Late 1970s, 2 children, wife, Hilltop, north of San Francisco, killed myself to earn my PhD from a great university, was told it was the union card. Went for the jobs. They said, drop dead, white man. We're not hiring. 200 universities told me to die and put my future on hold. 2 young children, nowhere to turn. I had killed myself for that PhD. I went out on the deck of my house in the valley, and I started to scream to God. I asked him to just give me a living. I didn't ask for a fortune. I said, God, please, just give me a living. I don't know what to do. It didn't happen overnight. It wasn't a Cecil B. DeMille production. It was through that moment, and I swear as God is my witness, that's when things started to come my way. Slowly, but surely. Things opened up. It was like the Red Sea started to part. And then in 1993 or 4, I sent out a demo tape to like 350 radio program directors, and about 5 of them around the country said, that's good stuff, blah, 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 would you like to fill in? And that opened up the door to radio. It's almost a quarter of a century later, Alex, that I've been on this ride of talk radio and authoring. But I'm still wandering in the wilderness, Alex. I'm still wandering in the wilderness. There's no recognition for my struggle, nor should there be. God does not want me to be acclaimed. God does not want me to be sitting up on some high tower, beloved by the world. I think he wants me to be behind the microphone and behind the book, anonymously doing what I've always been doing, which is writing and talking. That's all there is to it. I'm not an evangelist. I'm not looking to build a mega church or create some kind of organization. That's not who I am. I think each person has to struggle in their own way, find their own way, and come to understand they're not alone.
It's Dr. Michael Savage, world-famous talk show host. He's also the author of God, Faith, and Reason. Among his many books, they're always enjoyable reads. And thanks for joining me on the show, Dr. Savage. I appreciate all you do.
Alex, thanks for drawing me out, as usual. I really do appreciate it.